It was a spur-of-the-moment decision, really. I had been dreaming about this solo camping trip for months, imagining the freedom of waking up to the sound of birds, the feel of fresh air, and the quiet that only nature can provide. So, when the weekend finally came around, I packed my gear and drove out to the national park. The idea was simple: get away, spend a few days alone, disconnect from everything, and reset. I had done my research on the area, knew the trails, the campgrounds, the safety guidelines. As a solo female camper, I knew there were certain precautions I had to take, things that I couldn't ignore, no matter how safe I wanted to feel. There had been a tip I read on a forum a while back that stuck with me. Something about setting up 2 chairs outside your tent when camping alone. The idea was that it might help discourage creepers, make it look like you were expecting company, or that there was someone else around. At first, I thought it sounded a little silly, but after everything I'd read about other solo women getting harassed or worse, it felt like a small, simple step to take. It would be just me, alone in the woods, and I didn't want to take any chances. So, I set up camp that first evening, and sure enough, I arranged the 2 chairs outside my tent as the sun began to dip below the horizon. It wasn't much, just a couple of foldable camp chairs, but the thought that it could help made me feel a little bit better. I had planned a simple dinner that evening, some packaged pasta, and a mug of tea as I sat by the fire, watching the flickering flames. The campground was peaceful. The fire crackled, the smell of pine filled the air, and the only sound was the occasional rustle of leaves as the wind moved through the trees. It was the perfect night for a solo camping trip. I wasn't worried, but there was a small voice in the back of my mind reminding me to stay alert. After dinner, I spent some time just relaxing, enjoying the solitude. The moon was bright, casting long shadows on the forest floor. The stars began to shine through the gaps in the tree canopy, and I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I had never really been afraid of the outdoors before, but tonight, with only the glow of the fire and the chirping of distant creatures, something felt different. It wasn't fear, exactly, just a heightened awareness, like the woods themselves were watching me. I brushed it off as nerves, grabbed my flashlight, and made my way to the outhouse nearby. The walk was short, maybe 5 minutes. The trail was clear, and the moonlight was bright enough that I didn't even need the flashlight. I did notice, though, that the campground seemed quieter than usual. The sounds of the night, the owls, the insects, had dimmed. It was as though the forest itself was holding its breath. I chalked it up to my imagination, just nerves after spending the first evening alone in the woods. When I came back, I was relieved to see my camp still intact. The 2 chairs were still there, side by side, just where I had left them. I made a quick check of the tent, making sure everything was secured, and then I crawled into my sleeping bag for the night. The cold air crept in, but I was warm enough. The fire had died down to embers, and the shadows around the campsite grew deeper. For a while, I just lay there, staring out through the mesh of my tent, watching the dark shapes of the trees sway gently in the breeze. Everything felt so still, but the silence was unsettling. Somehow, it was a silence I hadn't experienced before. Usually, there were sounds, an owl, a distant animal, the wind rustling, but tonight, the forest felt different. I eventually dozed off, but I woke up in the middle of the night. Something was off. I couldn't explain it, but the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. I lay still for a moment, listening, but there was nothing. No wind, no rustling leaves, no owls. Just the stillness. I turned onto my side, trying to shake off the unease. But then I heard it. A soft crunch of leaves, followed by the faintest sound of something or someone moving around the camp. I froze, holding my breath. The air felt thick now, like it was pressing in on me. I didn't dare move. I listened intently, hoping I was imagining it, but the sounds came again. Faint steps on the forest floor, almost too quiet to notice. My heart began to race. I wanted to grab my flashlight to peer outside the tent, but I was frozen in place. I stayed perfectly still, hoping whoever it was wouldn't notice me. It sounded like someone was walking around the camp. Slowly, deliberately. They were close now, just beyond the perimeter of my tent, close enough that I could hear the soft shuffle of their feet. My mind raced, Could it be a bear? No, it didn't sound like a bear. It wasn't the heavy, lumbering footsteps I'd heard in videos. This was something lighter, more human. The thought chilled me. I kept perfectly still, breathing slowly and quietly, hoping that they wouldn't come closer. But then I heard it again, this time a faint creaking sound, like the noise of one of the camp chairs shifting. I held my breath, straining my ears. My mind screamed at me to grab my knife, to do something, but I couldn't. I had to stay quiet, stay unnoticed. I listened for any other sounds, but the only thing I could hear now was my own rapid breathing. The steps circled the camp, lingering near the fire pit for a moment before moving on. Then, just as quietly as they had come, the sound stopped. I waited for what felt like an eternity, straining to hear even the smallest noise. But nothing. The silence returned, heavy and suffocating. I didn't move for a long time. I didn't want to take the chance that whoever or whatever had been outside would hear me. The thought of someone lurking in the dark, so close to my camp, made my stomach twist with dread. Eventually, I gathered enough courage to peek outside the tent. I held my breath as I unzipped the flap just a crack, trying to keep the noise to a minimum. The camp was still, the two chairs sitting just outside my tent. Nothing seemed disturbed. I waited a little longer, watching the shadows cast by the trees. Nothing moved, but I wasn't ready to go back to sleep. I decided to leave the lights on inside the tent and keep my gear within reach. I wouldn't make the same mistake of letting my guard down again. I stayed up, my mind running through every possibility. The next morning, I woke up early, still feeling uneasy. I packed up my camp, trying to shake the feeling that had clung to me since the night before. But as I was folding up my tent, I noticed something strange. The two chairs, which had been positioned so carefully the night before, were now facing each other. They hadn't been like that when I had gone to bed. There was no way they could have moved by themselves. Suddenly, the weight of what had happened the night before hit me harder. Whoever had been outside my tent had been close enough to move my chairs, close enough to make sure I felt vulnerable. I didn't finish packing. I grabbed my stuff, shoved everything into my backpack, and without another thought, I left. I didn't care about finishing my trip or spending the second night there. All I wanted was to get out of the woods. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly avoided something terrible. I kept telling myself it was just a coincidence, just my imagination running wild. But deep down, I knew the truth. Whoever had been out there was watching me, and they were still out there. The thing that stuck with me, the thing that I couldn't stop thinking about, was how I had followed that tip, the one about the two chairs. It hadn't kept me safe, but it had made the creeper think I wasn't alone. Maybe that's what had kept them from getting too close. Maybe it was just luck. But no matter what, I learned a valuable lesson that night. When you're alone in the woods, you're always vulnerable, and no amount of chairs will change that. I had been planning my solo camping trip for months. It was my first time going out alone, and I had been looking forward to the peace, the escape from everything. I wanted to be alone with my thoughts, just me and the wilderness. It felt like a chance to truly disconnect. No phone signal, no responsibilities, no noise, just the sounds of the forest, the rustling of leaves, the chirping of birds, and the quiet hum of the night. I had chosen a remote campsite, not far from the trailhead, but far enough to feel isolated. It was deep enough in the woods that I felt completely separate from the world. A small, hidden campground with only a few tent sites. I figured it would be perfect, but as a solo female camper, I knew that I had to be cautious. You never know who or what might be out there, and I had read enough stories to know that I couldn't afford to let my guard down. One tip I had come across when researching solo camping was about boots. The idea was simple. Buy a pair of heavy-duty, worn-in boots and keep them outside your tent. The thought was that it would give the impression that you weren't alone, that someone else was with you. The idea behind it was to deter creepers or anyone with ill intentions, making them think twice before approaching. It sounded like a good idea, so I took the advice seriously. I bought a sturdy pair of boots, the kind that looked worn in and had seen a lot of use. I didn't own a man, but I figured that if anyone saw those boots outside my tent, it might just make them think twice. It was a small thing, a little mental trick, but it helped me feel a bit safer. The campsite was nestled between towering trees, with a clearing in the middle where I could set up my tent. The sun was starting to set by the time I arrived, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I quickly set up my camp, choosing a spot close enough to the fire pit but far enough to be hidden from the main path. I was alone, as expected, and the only sounds were the rustling of the trees in the wind and the distant call of an owl. I placed my boots outside the tent, just as the advice had suggested. The heavy-duty boots, a little dirt-streaked, were positioned at the entrance, placed deliberately to give the impression that I had company. I wasn't sure if it would actually work, but I figured it couldn't hurt. The first night went by without incident. I cooked my meal on the small camp stove, sat by the fire, and watched the flames dance in the darkness. It was peaceful, the kind of peaceful I had hoped for. There was something almost therapeutic about being completely alone, cut off from everything. As I settled into my tent that night, I zipped it up tightly, pulled the sleeping bag around me, and tried to ignore the faint unease that had started to creep in. Maybe it was just the newness of being alone in the woods, or maybe it was the stories I had read that kept running through my mind. But I pushed the thoughts aside, reminding myself that everything would be fine. I had taken all the right precautions after all. The next morning, I woke to the smell of fresh pine and the soft light filtering through the trees. I had slept fitfully, but I didn't mind. It was a new day, and I had planned a hike on one of the nearby trails. The boots outside my tent were still in place, just where I had left them. As I packed my things for the hike, I noticed something odd. The boots had been shifted slightly. They weren't exactly where I had left them. At first, I thought I had moved them by accident when I was packing up, but then I realized I hadn't even touched them since the night before. I chalked it up to the wind, maybe. It was possible the breeze had moved them slightly, but it didn't sit right with me. I didn't linger on it too long. I had a trail to explore, and the last thing I wanted was to waste time worrying about something so trivial. I was here to enjoy the woods, after all. The hike was beautiful, a mix of steep inclines and gentle paths, with occasional breaks to admire the view. I kept my eyes peeled for wildlife, and my mind stayed focused on the trail ahead. There was something calming about the rhythm of walking, the soft crunch of my boots on the forest floor, the steady sound of my breath. I didn't encounter anyone else on the trail, and that was fine by me. The isolation was exactly what I needed. By the time I returned to camp, it was late afternoon. The sun had begun to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the clearing. I was tired from the hike, but it was the good kind of tired. As I approached the campsite, I noticed something odd again. The boots, which had been sitting neatly outside my tent, were now positioned differently, closer to the fire pit, almost as if someone had intentionally moved them. My heart skipped a beat. This time, I knew something wasn't right. I looked around the campsite, but everything else seemed normal. My tent was still there, my gear untouched, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been here. Someone had been watching me. The idea that my boots were moved so deliberately, made my skin crawl. I felt a knot form in my stomach. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but it was hard not to. I was alone. The campsite was supposed to be remote, but the boots had been moved twice now. Someone had to have been here. I forced myself to stay calm, to push the panic back down. There was no need to overreact. Could be nothing. Could be an animal or the wind or just my imagination. But I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was wrong. That night, as I sat by the fire, I kept my eyes on the woods surrounding me. The wind had picked up again, and the trees swayed in the breeze. The fire crackled, throwing shadows across the campsite, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I kept the fire burning bright, hoping that if anyone was out there, they would stay away. The thought of someone lurking in the darkness, watching me, made my skin crawl. The boots outside my tent were still in their new position, closer to the fire pit, and I didn't feel any safer knowing that. The night passed without incident, but I didn't sleep well. I kept hearing noises, soft steps in the distance, the occasional rustle of leaves. Every time I thought I heard something, I would freeze, listening intently, but then it would go quiet again. I kept the flashlight by my side, just in case. By the time morning came, I was exhausted. I packed up my tent and gear quickly, my hands shaking as I stuffed everything into my backpack. I didn't care about taking my time anymore. I just wanted to leave. The boots outside my tent were still where they had been left the night before, closer to the fire pit, as if someone had deliberately moved them again. I didn't even bother to touch them this time. I didn't want to. I packed up the rest of my things in a hurry, feeling the pressure of the moment. There was a pit in my stomach, a gut feeling that I couldn't ignore. I had to get out of here. I didn't know who had been watching me or why they had moved the boots, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't sticking around to find out. As I drove away from the campground, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following me, but the road was empty. I drove straight to the nearest town, pulling into a gas station to calm myself down. I took a deep breath and tried to shake the lingering feeling of dread. It wasn't until I got back home and unpacked my gear that I finally realized something. The boots were gone. They had never made it back into my car. Whoever had been out there had taken them. I couldn't explain why they had been moved in the first place or why they had disappeared. But in the end, the only thing I knew for certain was that my little trick, the heavy-duty boots outside my tent, hadn't fooled anyone. They had just made me a target. And now, I was left with a nagging feeling, the eerie certainty that someone had been watching me. Someone who had been waiting for me to make a mistake. The boots weren't just a hint that someone was with me. They were a sign that someone was very much there, lurking in the shadows, watching me. And next time, I wouldn't be so quick to ignore my instincts. I had always wanted to try solo camping. The idea of being alone in the woods, surrounded by nothing but trees, the sounds of nature, and the quiet solitude had always been something I dreamed of. As a woman, I knew it was something I had to be careful about, but I figured with enough preparation I could handle it. I wasn't looking for adventure or excitement. I just wanted peace and time to reflect, time to get away from everything. A friend of mine who'd done a lot of solo camping had given me a few tips. One of the things she mentioned was how important it was to make it look like you weren't alone. If you're camping by yourself, make it clear you've got company, she said. It can be as simple as putting a pair of worn boots outside your tent. From a thrift shop would be perfect, so it's obvious they've been worn. At first, I didn't fully understand why that mattered, but when I thought about it, it made sense. No one wants to risk messing with someone who might have another person with them, even if that other person is just a pair of boots. I wasn't sure where to find a pair of worn boots, but a visit to the local thrift store did the trick. The boots I picked up were heavy-duty work boots, a bit scuffed and worn, clearly having been used for some time. I figured that would send the message that I wasn't alone out there. I wasn't sure if it would actually work, but it couldn't hurt to try. The night I set off for my solo camping trip, I felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. I had packed all the essentials: tent, sleeping bag, cooking gear, and a few extra layers of clothing. The weather forecast was perfect, and the campsite I chose was deep in the woods, away from the typical busy spots. I wanted solitude, but I also wanted safety, so I made sure to pick a place that had some distance from the nearest trail. When I arrived at the campsite, it was exactly what I had imagined. A small clearing surrounded by towering trees, the soft murmur of a nearby stream in the distance. The sun was starting to set, casting the sky in hues of orange and pink. I couldn't have asked for a more peaceful place to spend the night. I set up my tent and unpacked my gear. As I was getting everything ready, I placed the boots outside the tent, just like I'd seen recommended. I arranged them neatly, hoping they would look as though they had been left there by someone else, maybe a hiking companion who had gone off to collect firewood or explore the area. It was a small thing, but I figured it might just be enough to send a message. The fire crackled as I sat by it, enjoying the quiet of the evening. I was alone, but in a way, the boots made me feel like I wasn't. I spent the evening by the fire, cooking my dinner, and listening to the sounds of the forest. The night was peaceful, and for a while, I almost forgot I was out there alone. The air was cool but comfortable, and the stars above were starting to twinkle as the sky darkened. I went into my tent as the night grew colder. I made sure to zip the tent tightly and lay my sleeping bag down. I felt secure, safe in the knowledge that my precautions were in place. I didn't expect anything to happen. I wasn't looking for trouble. It was just me, a pair of boots, and the quiet of the woods. But then, in the middle of the night, I woke up to a noise. It wasn't the usual sounds of the forest. No rustling leaves or chirping animals. This was something else. A soft, almost inaudible crunch, like someone stepping on leaves, but too deliberate. I froze, listening intently. My heart started to race. I told myself it was probably an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon, but the sound seemed too intentional, too methodical. I held my breath and waited, but the noise didn't come again. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that I was just being paranoid. After all, I was alone in the woods. I was bound to be a little on edge. I eventually drifted back to sleep, but the feeling of unease stayed with me. I woke up several times during the night, always listening, always waiting for that sound to come back. It never did. The next morning, I got up early, stretching my stiff muscles and making coffee. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden glow over the forest. The morning was crisp and fresh, and the forest was alive with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves. For a moment, it felt like nothing had happened. But then, I noticed the boots. They weren't where I had left them. At first, I thought I had moved them by accident, but the more I looked, the more I realized I hadn't. The boots were now slightly further from the tent, as though someone had deliberately moved them. I stared at them for a long time, trying to make sense of it. Could the wind have done that? Could they have been moved by something else, like an animal? But the more I thought about it, the less I believed that explanation. The boots were heavy. They were thick, bulky, and there was no way the wind could have moved them so precisely. Someone had been near my tent. Someone had moved them, and that thought made my stomach tighten in a way I couldn't ignore. I tried to brush it off as nothing. Maybe it was just an animal. Maybe I was overreacting. But something about the way the boots were moved, and the strange sound I had heard in the night, made it hard to dismiss the thought that I wasn't alone out there. I spent the rest of the morning on high alert. I cleaned up my camp, packed away everything I could, and kept my eyes on the surrounding woods. I didn't feel comfortable anymore. The boots had been moved, and that made it feel like someone had been watching me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't the only one in the area. The day passed slowly. I took a walk around the campsite, hoping to calm my nerves. The woods were beautiful, but there was something about them now that felt different. Like I wasn't alone, like someone was following me. Every sound seemed amplified, and every rustle of leaves made me tense up. By late afternoon, I decided I would pack up and leave. The peace I had come out here to find was gone. I didn't want to stay another night in the woods, especially with the boots moved and the eerie feeling of being watched. The thought of someone else being out there, someone who was intentionally watching me, was enough to make me decide to cut the trip short. I started packing up my things quickly, but as I did, I noticed something that made my heart race. The boots, those damn boots, had been moved again. This time, they were even further from the tent. They were positioned almost as though someone had deliberately arranged them to look like a person had stepped out of the tent and left. I froze, staring at them. My mind raced, and my hands shook as I finished packing the last of my gear. I didn't want to be there anymore. I didn't care about the hike I had planned, or the time I'd spent preparing for the trip. I just wanted to leave. As I loaded up the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. The woods seemed too quiet now, too still. The sound of the birds, the rustling leaves, all seemed distant and muted, as if something had dampened the noise of the world around me. I glanced over my shoulder as I started the engine, half expecting to see someone standing in the trees, but the clearing was empty. The boots were still there, lying on the ground, and I quickly sped away from the campsite. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town, and even then, I couldn't fully shake the unease. The boots, the noises, the feeling of being watched, it all lingered. Even as I sat in a cafe, sipping my coffee, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I'd heard enough stories to know that there were people out there who would do things like that. They would watch and wait. And I had been naive to think that the boots, those simple, worn-in boots, would make a difference. They didn't fool anyone. They just made me a target. And I would never forget the feeling of knowing that someone had been out there, waiting, watching. I've been camping alone before. There's something peaceful about the solitude, about being surrounded by trees, water, and nothing but the sound of birds and wind. It wasn't that I wanted to be alone. It's just that I never really got along well with large groups of people, and sometimes the best thing you can do is get away from it all. I had chosen a spot far away from the usual campgrounds, deep in the woods. It was a small clearing near a creek, nestled in the middle of a national forest. I knew it wasn't the most popular area, which was exactly what I was looking for. I wanted quiet, I wanted peace, and most importantly, I wanted to be by myself. I arrived late in the afternoon, the sun already starting its descent toward the horizon. It was mid-autumn, so the air had a chill to it, but nothing unbearable. I began setting up my tent, making sure everything was in order. I had packed light, a sleeping bag, a small stove, a few meals, and a book to read. I wasn't planning on doing anything extravagant, just spending a couple of days in the woods, getting away from the world. As I unpacked, I noticed a set of boot prints near my camp. At first, I thought it was just a random animal track, but the more I looked, the more I realized they weren't animal tracks at all. They were human. The prints were fresh, too fresh to be from the previous day's hiker. I looked around, trying to see if anyone was nearby. There was nothing, just the dense trees and the steady flow of the creek. I had the distinct feeling that I was being watched, but I chalked it up to my overactive imagination. Still, I decided to be cautious. I made sure to keep my campfire visible, knowing that it could signal to anyone who might be around that I wasn't a complete newbie when it came to camping. I didn't want to attract attention, but I figured it might deter anyone who thought about getting too close. That night, after I finished my meal and cleaned up, I retreated to my tent. The fire crackled softly, and the world around me seemed so still, so quiet. I pulled my sleeping bag around me and lay there, my mind drifting. But just as I started to relax, I heard a sound. It was faint, like a soft crunch of leaves or twigs. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze. It was hard to tell where it was coming from. I looked out the small opening of my tent, but there was no movement. I convinced myself it was just a deer or some other forest creature. I didn't fall asleep right away. I lay there, eyes wide open, listening for any other sounds. It was quiet again, but I couldn't shake the unease. My hand gripped the flashlight next to me, ready to turn it on at a moment's notice. I tried to push the thoughts of someone being out there out of my mind, but the fear kept gnawing at me. After what felt like an eternity, I finally drifted off to sleep, the sounds of the woods lulling me into a restless slumber. I woke up a few hours later, disoriented and groggy. It was still dark outside, but something was different. The air felt thicker, heavier. My tent was still, but there was a strange silence, like the whole forest had gone still. I heard the crunching again, but this time it was closer, much closer. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and I quickly reached for the flashlight. The beam of light sliced through the darkness, but there was nothing. No figure, no movement, just the shadows and trees around me. The sounds had stopped. I wanted to believe it was nothing, just the wind or maybe an animal trying to get to the food I'd left outside. But something didn't feel right. I started to feel like I wasn't alone anymore. It was a creeping feeling that settled deep in my stomach, a cold knot that wouldn't go away. I decided to get up and check. It was the only thing that made sense to me, to try and get to the bottom of the strange sounds. I unzipped my tent slowly, making as little noise as possible. I shone the flashlight around, scanning the area. There was no sign of anyone or anything. Still, that feeling of being watched hadn't gone away. I stepped out of the tent, carefully looking around, trying to calm myself. The only sound now was the trickling of the creek and the occasional rustle of leaves in the trees. My eyes moved to the space where I had placed my boots by the tent's entrance. They were still there as I had left them, But then I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. The ground around the boots was disturbed. It was subtle, just enough to make it clear that someone had been there. I stepped closer, my mind racing. Someone had definitely been near my tent, and the thought of that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I looked around again, hoping to see someone, but there was only silence. I backed away slowly, my mind scrambling to make sense of what was happening. I didn't know what to do. Should I pack up and leave? Should I just sit tight and wait it out? The longer I stayed out there, the more I felt like I was being stalked. The feeling of being watched intensified, and I couldn't shake it. I didn't want to leave. I had come all this way for solitude, for peace. But the longer I stayed, the more the anxiety settled in. I felt trapped. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was nearby, just out of sight, watching my every move. I decided to take action. I knew I had to make it clear I wasn't someone who would be easily intimidated. I wanted to send a message, loud and clear, that I wasn't an easy target. I grabbed my gear, my pack, and the remaining supplies and made sure everything was put away. I didn't want to leave anything behind, not even a trace. I moved quickly, but carefully, my eyes darting around every few seconds. I knew I couldn't let my guard down. I decided to take a walk to clear my head, maybe make a plan. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I couldn't stay in the tent any longer. The woods were quiet again, but the tension in the air was unbearable. I walked for what felt like an hour, the light from my flashlight cutting through the darkness. I tried to focus on the sounds of the forest, the rustling leaves, the soft babbling of the creek, but all I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat. My thoughts were a blur, too many questions swirling around. Had someone been out there? What were they doing? Why hadn't they approached me yet? I couldn't stay out there anymore. The sense of danger had grown too real. I felt like I was on the edge of something, a breaking point where the line between reality and paranoia blurred. I couldn't afford to let my guard down anymore. I made the decision to leave. I had enough. I didn't care how far I had come, how beautiful the woods were, or how much I had wanted the peace of a solo camping trip. The fear, the sense of being stalked, was too overwhelming. I packed up my gear and made my way back to the car, each step heavy with the weight of unease. I didn't look back, didn't take my eyes off the path ahead. I knew that if I did, I'd see someone watching me. When I reached my car, I didn't feel relief right away. I felt an odd mix of dread and relief, a strange sense that I'd barely escaped something. I locked the doors and started the engine, my hands shaking as I drove away from the campsite. The silence in the car was deafening. I couldn't get rid of the feeling that someone had been following me. Later, when I recounted the experience to a friend, they told me something that sent a chill down my spine. That's extremely creepy behavior. You handled it correctly, though. Trust your instincts. And I did trust them. Something was out there, and I wasn't willing to wait around to find out what it was. The boots, the strange noises, the feeling of being watched. It all pointed to something real. It wasn't just my imagination. Someone had been out there, and they hadn't wanted me there. In the end, I learned something valuable. Solo camping is meant to be peaceful, but sometimes the woods can be more dangerous than you think. It doesn't matter how prepared you are or how safe you feel. If your instincts tell you something's wrong, you listen, and you leave. I always thought of camping as a way to reset, a place where the noise of the world falls away and you're left with only the basic things: food, water, shelter, and the quiet of the woods. I had done it solo more than a few times, and even though I always had a bit of nervousness setting up alone in the middle of nowhere, I never let it stop me. I had a good system, packed smart, knew how to track my surroundings, and had enough experience to avoid most of the common mistakes people make when they romanticize solo camping without preparing for it. That weekend, I had decided to try a small, lightly used campground up in a more remote section of the forest. It wasn't far from a ranger station, which gave me some sense of security. I'd read a few reviews from other hikers who said it was peaceful, quiet, and usually empty. That was perfect for me. I liked the feeling of having a spot to myself, somewhere I could wake up to birds instead of cars, fall asleep to crickets instead of people yelling or playing music. I arrived late morning. The drive had been long, winding, and beautiful. I checked in at the small ranger booth before heading up the gravel road to the site. The ranger on duty was an older man, quiet, polite. He gave me a map and a permit, made sure I had a bear canister and proper gear, and told me which sites were occupied. Only 2 others were taken, according to him, one near the entrance and another across the creek, a decent hike away. That meant the rest were open. I took one of the more isolated sites farther in, surrounded by tall trees, thick brush, and maybe 50 yards from a trail that followed a ridgeline. It was perfect. I spent most of that first day setting up camp, gathering firewood, walking a short loop trail to stretch my legs. I didn't see anyone, not a single person since leaving the ranger booth. The weather was cool but dry, with a strong wind that rustled through the pines all afternoon. I cooked a simple meal on my stove and ate on a flat rock near the edge of my camp, listening to the sound of the wind moving through the forest. I didn't even start a fire that night, just sat and watched the light fade and the shadows grow long. The night came fast, and it got cold quickly. I got into my tent early and zipped myself up in my sleeping bag, feeling satisfied and calm. Sometime around 2 in the morning, I woke up suddenly. No dream, no sound, just wide awake. My ears were ringing in the kind of silence that you only get way out in the woods, the kind that feels heavy. I lay still for a while, trying to figure out what woke me, but there was nothing. No wind, no branches breaking, no animals rooting around my camp. It was too still. I eventually drifted back off, thinking nothing of it. The next morning, I stepped out of the tent to find something strange. There were boot prints just outside the entrance, pressed deep into the damp dirt. Big solid tracks, not mine. They were too wide, too heavy. My stomach turned when I realized how fresh they looked. I looked around instinctively, trying to see if someone had wandered through the area, but there was no sign of anyone. My campsite was clean and untouched otherwise. Nothing stolen, nothing moved, but those prints made the hair on my arms stand up. Someone had come very close to me while I was sleeping. I shook it off. I told myself it could have been another camper passing through. Maybe someone had taken a wrong turn and walked too close before realizing it. Still, it bothered me enough that I took out my phone and snapped a photo of the prints, just in case. I also moved some of my gear around to make it noisier. I hung up my bear canister lid in a way that it would clatter if anyone bumped it. Little tripwire tricks, not enough to hurt someone, but enough to wake me. That day passed without anything else weird happening. I did another hike, wrote in my notebook, read for a while. I didn't see another person, not even a hiker on the trail above. I was trying to relax again, but those boot prints kept coming back to me. I left my campsite cleaner than usual that night, kept everything inside the tent except my food, and slept with my headlamp in one hand. And sure enough, I woke up again, this time around 3 in the morning. Not because I was startled, but because I heard something soft, deliberate. I lay frozen, holding my breath, listening. There it was again, a slow crunch, then another. Someone walking, not stumbling, walking slowly, carefully, maybe 10 feet outside my tent. I could hear breathing. I could hear the shift of fabric. They weren't trying to make noise, but they weren't being silent either. They were just standing there. I stayed still, trying not to make a sound. My headlamp was still in my hand, and my knife was next to my bag, but I didn't move. I didn't even blink. My heart was pounding so loud I thought they might hear it. The footsteps stopped right outside the tent. I could feel it, like someone was crouched down, inches away, just looking at the nylon wall between us. They didn't say anything. They didn't move for at least a minute. And then I heard a zipper, not mine. A slow zip like a backpack pocket. Then some more shifting, a scrape, something metal. I didn't want to know what it was. I just lay there, staring up, barely breathing. Then, after what felt like hours, I heard the soft crunching of footsteps again, fading away, moving back toward the trail. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. At first light, I unzipped the tent and stepped out, my legs shaking. There were more prints, again not mine, deep, deliberate, They circled my tent and led back into the woods in a direction I hadn't come from. I checked my gear. Nothing was missing, but my bear canister had been moved a few feet. Not rolled, not dragged, just moved. That detail stuck with me for some reason. I knew I couldn't stay. I packed up as fast as I could, checking over my shoulder constantly. I moved like I was being watched, like someone was going to step out from behind a tree at any second. The whole way back to the ranger station, I had that feeling crawling up my spine, that feeling you get when someone's eyes are on you, even if you can't see them. When I got to the station, I told the ranger what had happened. I showed him the photos I took of the boot prints, described everything in as much detail as I could. He was polite but didn't seem too concerned. He asked if anything was stolen. I said no. He asked if I saw anyone. I said no. He shrugged and told me there wasn't much he could do. Said maybe it was a hiker who got lost. Maybe someone camping without a permit. I could file a report, but unless I had a name or a plate number, it would go nowhere. I insisted, told him this wasn't just some guy walking through. Someone came up to my tent, stood there in the middle of the night, and unzipped something. Someone had bad intentions. The ranger nodded, said he'd note it, but it was clear he wasn't going to follow up. I left angry, not just because of the fear, but because it felt like it didn't matter. Like I could have been hurt or worse, and it would have just been a mystery in the woods. When I got home, I couldn't let it go. I shared my story online, showed the photos, described the events in as much detail as I could. I needed someone to take it seriously. Most people were supportive, but a few made me feel like I was overreacting. But I wasn't. That man, or whoever it was doing more than creeping. He was planning something, waiting, testing. He didn't try to talk. He didn't announce himself. He stood at the edge of my shelter, in the dark, listening to me sleep. That wasn't some lost hiker. That was someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Looking back, I know I handled it right. I didn't confront him. I didn't run through the woods blindly. And I didn't wait another night hoping it wouldn't happen again. I packed up, got out, and made sure to tell someone. But I wish more had been done. I wish that ranger had taken one look at the prints, seen the direction they came from, and gone out there with a radio, a weapon, and the authority to find whoever did that. Because someone like that doesn't stop. They find another campsite, another tent, another person too far from help. And next time, it might not be boot prints or a moved canister. It might be worse, much worse. I've still gone camping since then, but never solo. Not that deep. Not without some way to protect myself and someone else nearby. Because out there in the woods, there's no lock on your door, no street light, no neighbor to hear you scream, and the people who take advantage of that know exactly what they're doing. The woods are beautiful, but they're not empty, and some people out there treat them like a hunting ground. That's what I think about when I hear someone say they want to go camping alone. I think about those quiet footsteps in the night, that slow zipper, that breathing, and how close I came to never coming home. It should have been taken seriously. That man should have been found, because someone like that doesn't stop until someone makes them. I'm a big guy, 6'4", around 300 pounds, and not the kind of person people usually mess with. I'm not saying that to brag or to act tough. It's just who I am. I've worked physical jobs all my life, construction, warehouse, some security, and I've learned to carry myself in a way that makes most people think twice before getting weird. That said, size doesn't make you immune to feeling creeped out. And what happened to me on a weekend camping trip made it real clear that danger doesn't care how big you are. This was supposed to be a calm getaway. Nothing fancy. I'd been working overtime for a few months straight and figured I'd earned some time off. I picked a quiet campground a couple hours from home, someplace I'd been to before, but not recently. It wasn't a national park or anything, just a small site tucked away in the woods near a river. There were maybe 20 campsites total, and the website showed half of them open for the weekend I picked. I planned to head out Friday morning, spend 2 nights, and head back Sunday afternoon. Just me, a tent, a cooler, a couple fishing rods, and some books. Nothing complicated. I like being outdoors, I like the quiet, and sometimes it's just good to step away from everything. The drive in was uneventful. Clear weather, light traffic, and the roads through the woods were in decent shape. When I got to the campground, the place was mostly empty. Only 3 or 4 cars parked at other sites, scattered far enough apart that I couldn't see or hear anyone from mine. I picked one near the back corner, close to the river but still within walking distance of the pit toilets and water spigot. I set up my tent, laid out my sleeping pad and bag, stacked some firewood, and got everything ready for the evening. I had plenty of food, a propane stove, a flashlight, a first aid kit, and all the basics. It was about as low risk as camping gets. I spent the afternoon fishing and reading, then built a fire as the sun started to drop. I cooked up some sausages, had a couple beers, and just sat back watching the flames crackle. Nothing weird happened that night. The air got cold, the woods got quiet, and I crawled into my tent around 10. I woke up once around 3 because something crunched through the brush nearby. Probably a raccoon or a deer, but nothing that made me nervous. I'm used to animal noises. That's part of being out there. The next morning I made coffee, fried up some eggs, and went back to fishing. Around noon I decided to walk a trail that looped around the river for a couple miles. The trail was easy to follow, a mix of dirt and roots with the occasional muddy patch. I didn't see anyone the whole time, just squirrels and birds. When I got back to my site, everything was exactly how I left it. That afternoon, I saw a new car pulling into a site maybe 4 spaces down from mine. A beat-up old SUV with dark windows. Didn't think much of it at first. People show up all the time. I just noticed it because it made a racket. Rattling engine, squeaky suspension, tires crunching on the gravel like someone in a hurry. Pulled into the site kind of sloppily, half on the grass, and sat there with the engine running for a while. I didn't stare or anything. I glanced over a couple times but didn't want to look nosy. Eventually, the engine cut off. No doors opened. 10 minutes went by. Still nothing. I was sitting at my little folding table, reading, and every now and then I'd glance over. The vehicle just sat there. I figured maybe they were sleeping or talking or waiting for someone. Maybe just tired. Finally, the driver's door opened and a guy got out. Mid-30s maybe. Thin, wiry build. Wearing jeans and a hoodie. Hood pulled up even though it was sunny. He just stood by the car, facing my direction, not moving. I kept reading but noticed he wasn't unpacking or setting up anything. After 5 minutes of standing still, he walked off into the woods behind his site without even locking the car. That set something off in my gut. Not full-blown panic, but enough of a twinge that I took a mental note. Something was off. People don't usually drive all the way out here to walk off into the woods empty-handed without setting up camp first. I watched the woods for a while. Nothing. He was just gone. I figured maybe he had to piss and wanted privacy. Still, it was odd. He came back an hour later from a different direction like he'd looped around. He had a stick in his hand and was dragging it in the dirt as he walked. Still hadn't set anything up. He opened the back of the SUV, leaned inside for a bit, then closed it again and got back in the driver's seat. By now it was close to evening. The sun was lower, and the shadows stretched long between the trees. I made dinner and tried not to look over too often. He didn't make a fire, didn't cook, just sat in the car. I finished eating and cleaned up. I didn't want to leave food out. Bears aren't common here, but raccoons and skunks sure are. I zipped up the tent, tossed some more wood on the fire, and sat down to enjoy the evening. I heard the SUV door slam again. This time he got out and walked down the gravel road past my site. He didn't look at me, didn't say anything, just walked slowly, dragging that same stick. I didn't like that. He didn't have a flashlight, no gear, no water bottle, just walking slow like he was stalling or killing time. He went out of sight eventually, heading toward the front of the campground. I decided to stay up a little later and make sure he didn't come back doing something weirder. Around 9:30, I heard the SUV start up, headlights on, engine idling. He didn't pull out, just sat there with the lights aimed at the woods. Then he shut them off and killed the engine again. 15 minutes later, I heard what sounded like soft footsteps behind my tent. Not close, but close enough. Branches rustling, a crunch here and there. I sat up straight, heart pounding a little harder. My fire had died down, but there was enough glow to see my immediate surroundings. I grabbed my flashlight and walked a slow circle around the site. Nothing. Silence again. I stayed outside a while longer, then finally crawled into my tent with my light beside me and a knife tucked under my sleeping pad. I didn't sleep much. Every sound felt louder than normal. Around 1 a.m, I thought I heard a cough. Not close, but not far either. Could have been an animal. Could have been wind. Could have been him. I lay there stiff as a board for a long time, waiting. Eventually, exhaustion won. I woke up around 6. The sun wasn't fully up yet, but the light was coming back. I stepped out, stretched, and checked the area. Nothing looked disturbed. I walked toward the pit toilet, and when I passed the SUV's site, I noticed he still hadn't set up anything. No tent, no fire ring used, just the car parked crooked with the driver's window cracked. That was it. I was done. I trusted my instincts, and they were telling me this guy wasn't right. I didn't need to wait around to find out what he might do. I packed up fast. Tent, gear, food, everything back in the truck in under 20 minutes. I didn't eat breakfast, didn't make coffee, just wanted to be gone. As I pulled out, I saw the guy again. He was standing near the edge of the woods, maybe 30 yards from his car, just staring. Not at me directly, but through me, past me, hard to tell. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there. I drove straight to the ranger station at the highway turnout. There wasn't a ranger there that early, but a sign on the door gave a number for weekend calls. I dialed it and left a message with everything I saw. The guy's behavior, his car, his lack of gear, the wandering, the stick, the noises, everything. I gave them the site number and my name. I never heard back. I checked the campground website a few days later. All the listings were still available, no notes or closures. Nothing in the local news. I guess nothing happened or nothing they could prove. But I don't camp alone anymore. Not because I'm afraid of the woods. It's not the animals or the dark that gets to me. It's the people. You never really know what's going on in someone's head. Size doesn't matter. Strength doesn't matter. Some people don't care, and you won't know until it's too late. All I know is I got out before something happened, and I don't regret that for a second.